Hello and welcome to Gaming the Podcast. Surprise, surprise, this week we are talking about Elden Ring, and specifically we're talking about what choices the game offers the player, what choices we make, and how those choices affect the overall experience. And fair warning, there will be some spoilers for the early game here, so avoid... turn off the podcast, I suppose, if you don't want to. If you don't
go
want
and play Elden Ring.
Yeah, well, maybe go listen to one of our other episodes rather than just turn off the podcast.
Oh, good idea.
Okay, so we've both been playing Elden Ring, and I suppose the first choice that we're forced to make or given the chance to make is our starting class. So. Do we go through those? What class did you pick, and why did you pick it?
Okay, so mine was, and you're going to enjoy this, I think. Mine was, initially it started off by looking at the stats. Very sensible. What kind of game do I want to play? What kind of things? Firstly, what stats are linked to what attributes? Understanding that. What game do I want to play? What do I think is going to be the build that I want to eventually level towards? So I did the sensible stuff. So that led to things like choosing a class with low starting faith, because I decided I wasn't bothered about that side of it. Not that I wasn't going to want to do spells, but I wasn't bothered about like the faith-based spells, miracles and the like. So that narrowed it down initially, and then I looked at some things like reasonably high dexterity, kind of middle of the road in a few areas to give me some choices. So I was tempted to go with the Wretch, because that is a very literal, you start at level 1, which means it's very cheap to upgrade your early stat points, and it gives you just a level playing field for all of your stats, so you can choose where to take it. But I didn't go quite that far. So once I'd narrowed it down, I then started looking for thematic reasons as to why I might pick certain classes. So I've ended up with the Prisoner. And my prisoner is a female prisoner called Celine. And the narrative that I've constructed for myself is that this is the character from Returnal. She's got one orange eye and one blue eye. I've built her out like that in the visual appearance. And that she is now trapped. She's gone from being trapped in Returnal's eternal cycle to being trapped in Elden Ring. And that was basically and it was like, she's a prisoner. That makes sense. That was basically how I made the final decision as to how to choose my Elden Ring class.
So Elden Ring,
she's Returnal.
Elden Ring and Returnal are now the same universe of game.
Yes, in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, Celine has gone from being trapped in Returnal's cycle to Elden Rings, and that was how I made my final choice. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say there probably aren't too many other people that have done a similar thing and based their character on another video game. But yeah, that was how I decided. So I'm the prisoner. Her name's Celine. She's from Returnal. And that is in a more practical sense, that has allowed me to level a little bit for magic, which was a thing that I wanted to do this time. In a lot of the Souls games, I don't know that I've ever done that beyond just dabbling with magic. She's still much more of a physical attack-based class, but also has access to magic from the off, because you start with a wand or a staff, so you can actually access the magic right off the bat. It's the glintstone sorcery arm of magic. So I've got a bit of magic for like ranged attacks, which typically are kind of how I start combat encounters. And then, like more physical attacks. And there's sort of dexterity-based attacks. So I've tried to build with like a rapier or a couple of daggers. I'm not good enough to play just with a couple of daggers. I need some sort of way to block. And that's kind of my very early experience has been based around those kinds of key stat points and building out kind of a dexterity thing. Strength I've left pretty much alone. So that's my class and my reasons for picking it. Which video game character did you base your starting class in Elden Ring on?
I don't know. I'd like to say Pikachu or something, but it would be a lie. Pikachu, Pokemon is the same world. Yeah. I mean, some of so I'm the samurai. And some of the reasoning is similar, actually. So I wanted something that was primarily melee combat rather than ranged or magic. So the samurai starts with decent dex and then a decent spread between vigor, endurance, and strength, although I don't really use the strength aspect much. I've just been leveling dex, and I'm sticking to the original swords that you get, the Uchi Gatana, which I've leveled up a very long way now. Yeah, I don't really have like a backstory for my character. I guess I don't know. He's like a fallen samurai, I guess, which is a tragedy, and his name is So Tragic. That's his name. But really, with the samurai,
is that one word or is that
no,
two?
It's two words.
So
space tragic.
Okay,
Yeah, So Tragic.
So the family name. Tragic.
Yeah. So the samurai has starts off with the sword, starts off with shield, starts off with a bow. So the shield I've just given up immediately. So I just don't equip it. I just have two-handed with a sword or use the bow.
Right.
That's it. So I don't block ever. I just always dodge. I never. Well, not never, but I don't ever plan on it as a route to success. So yeah, mine's all about getting in close. You have to be close as well, which I don't love, because in the most recent Souls games that I've played are Demon Souls Remaster and Bloodborne, and in both of those I used longer reach weapons, so like the lance or the spear or whatever it's called in Demon Souls, and the giant axe in Bloodborne, the huge one. So I feel a bit more vulnerable with the samurai, because you need to be much closer to do serious damage with the sword. So it's all about getting in there real quick and then getting out again real quick, getting in, doing some strikes, trying to make, on bosses anyway that have enough hit points, trying to get them to bleed, because the sword causes bleeding if you cut enough times, which can be devastating. And I've just started using the bow more, because I can now equip arrows that cause bleeding as well. So so it all sort of layers and tiers up on top of each other, and you're just trying to. It's like death by 1,000 cuts, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, yeah. So we've chosen some. I mean, the reasoning sounds like we've chosen some things for a similar reason, but we've gone in a different direction.
Yeah, and that's one of the many choices, isn't it, that you make? And I've had that. I'm still I think I'm about, 18 now, 19 hours in ish, which in Elden Ring, unlike a lot of the Souls games, doesn't really put you at any particular point.
No.
And I think before Elden Ring, I would have said that about the Souls games. Like, well, you've got a lot of choice into which path you can take and which areas you explore. But I think the dispersion of the player base after, say, 20 hours is much wider here in Elden Ring because of the open world structure than it is in any of the Souls games, particularly something like Demon Souls, where it is very much kind of spokes on a wheel rather than just a big open world. So do you remember what were some of the early experiences that you had, the early areas that you visited? Did you broadly follow the kind of main path? Is it a thing that you'd recommend? Do you have any sort of recommendations, I suppose, for people starting out as to whether they should hit the main path quite hard or go off and just kind of explore the land?
I don't know. I thought I was doing the main path, because when you get the Lost Graces, they have like the little stream that comes off of them that like shows you where the next one is. So I was I think that's what they do.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. There are a couple that split, and it's okay.
Yeah, and then some of them just don't have any.
Yeah.
And then so I thought I was following the main path, but people. So I only got the summoning bell recently after having defeated Godric in the castle. This is where we get into spoilers, but in the castle, after defeating him, that's when I got the summoning bell. So I haven't used summoning at all. So that's the last major thing I've done in the game as of recording. So yeah, I haven't used the summoning at all. Whereas other people, that seems to be something that they've gotten immediately by following the main path.
Got it.
So
yeah, really early. Yeah, really very. I don't know. First few levels, I would say. After getting the ability to level up, I went back to the church, the first church that you find at night. But that was coincidental. And yeah, that I've got that, and I've had that for quite a while, and I've used it, several times. It isn't like a mainstay of all boss fights. I don't think it's like, oh, there's a boss fight, let's summon this, because it takes, depending on which spirit summons you're using, it takes a lot of your FP, and so there are other things you can spend FP on. So it is still a choice, a decision to be made in the moment. But there's definitely some points where I can see it would be useful, or has been useful, in terms of like an aggro thing, because you can you get different spirit summons that might be like 3 wolves is one of the early ones you get, or a couple of skeletal warriors that resurrect when they've been killed, or just a one-off jellyfish thing that spurts poison. And thinking about choosing which ones of those to use, because you only get to do it once in a boss fight, and then choosing which one of those to use based on like how the boss is behaving, and how do I want them to be aggroed from, multiple sources, or what has been part of my boss fight kind of strategy, I suppose, my approach. So yeah, the fact that you haven't had that will have led to a different experience. But I mean, of course, it's one of those, you can't know how different because you haven't been doing it.
No, so. And I wonder, even though I've now have the ability to summon, and I've got those 2 that you mentioned, those are the only 2 I've got, I think, the skeletons and the wolves. The skeletons I found somewhere, the wolves I think I bought off someone. But I don't know if I would use that, because the way that I've leveled up my character, so I'm level 37 now, and Vigor and Dex are like mid-20s, I think. And everything else is largely where it started. My endurance is a little bit higher, so I can get some extra stamina and lighten up my equip load so I can dodge faster, which is important for me because I don't block. But I use FP for this unsheath ability, it's called, which is a sword, which one of my samurai swords ability, where he just does like a proper like 7 samurai, sheaths his sword
on the draw,
and then flicks it out, and then you can, that's really powerful, and then you can do some extra attacks from there. And each use of that only takes up a small amount of FP, so I haven't increased my mind stat much to get me more FP, because I don't need it really, because with bosses I can still get 7 or 8 of those off before I run out of FP. Okay. So I don't know if I'd want to give up that and use the summons instead. Yeah, because I do rely on that ability quite a lot. Like when you're up close, that's a great one. Get in close, unsheath, a couple more hits if you can afford them, and then get out. But with summon, I'd lose that ability to kind of rely on that.
Definitely, because I've got summons that take down over half my FP. I mean, I haven't leveled my FP massively, but I have a bit, and it's still taking over half my FP. So, and it's a gamble, of course, and that's why, again, like in terms of the choosing how to deploy them, or if you're going to deploy them at all, seeing how the boss is fighting, because often you get a symbol up that says when you can use them, and often that is at bosses, but there will be
the
like
gate thing.
And there'll also be like quite densely populated areas that have got enemies that you can use them as well. And I tend just to use them on the bosses if at all. But that's why like observing how the boss is attacking and then deciding which to use is an important thing, rather than, it's not like summoning somebody in where you just do it right at the beginning and you go in there with them. And so that's a thing. It is a trade-off if you're going to do that. You have to accept that you're then choosing not to do other stuff. And that's, I mean, just that depth of choice in all of those. There's just a handful of anecdotal situations, but I feel like you and I are probably we tend to play games generally in, I think, probably quite different ways. The games we choose to spend a lot of time in often are different games. And so I imagine playing this differently. And so, but the fact that you can have there isn't a right way of doing it. Obviously, there isn't a valid way. It's just whatever you're enjoying. But I feel like that is far broader here than it has been in previous Souls games. And I mean, it's a thing that I've been experimenting a lot and loving. And as I say, nearly 20 hours in, and I haven't even really decided what weapon I'm going with. A flail is one, a couple of daggers have been another, but yeah, I just haven't really got to a point of settling on something.
See, I think I'm set now because my samurai sword is like +8, and my bow
Wow.
is like +2 or 3. So like I'm not starting again leveling up a weapon.
Yeah.
Like
I think my flat is only
no,
+3. So yeah,
yeah,
that's
like no
that's
chance. So like
huge.
my character is really that sword, really, and then it's just a
Yeah.
bunch of hit points, and that's it.
Attached to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Although that's not true actually,
A meat
because
bag.
when I picked the samurai, like I said, I wasn't planning on using the bow at all, really, and that's based on previous Soulsborne games experiences where I never use ranged combat, be it bow
Yeah.
or crossbow
Yeah.
or magic. So I was really picking the samurai for the starting stats and the swords. But I have been using the bow more than I thought I would, and like I said, more recently because now I've got those bloods, whatever I can't remember what they're called, blood tinged arrows, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, and they synergize nicely with my sword. So yeah, like the options or the choices given to me by picking the samurai, I've plumped for some of those in a way that I never expected, that I never
Yeah.
intended to when
Yeah.
I first picked that class. And now I used the bow to whittle away the final hit points of Godric. But typically, I don't use it on boss fights because I generally use it to just pick off a single enemy in a mob, or to weaken various enemies in a mob before attacking them with a sword. Because I always feel quite vulnerable because I don't block.
Yeah.
So getting into a mob is quite dangerous for me. And the sword doesn't have any like spinning attacks or anything. I can't like attack in a so I need to be quite careful about where I'm aiming. So lowering an enemy's the mob's total hit points makes it much easier for me, because if I can go in there and it only takes like one hit to kill everyone after hitting them with a bow, then that's much safer for what my like sort of ability list is.
There's definitely an Ash of War that you could use. There's a sweeping attack on a sword as an Ash of War, which is the things that you can get to apply to your weapons to make them do a certain thing when you press L2, which I presume is what
that's what Unsheath
is.
Yeah. It's the one that you start with, Unsheath.
Right.
But it's really good, and I'm going to need real convincing to move away from that.
I mean, yeah, the fact that that's what I've been just finding random things out in the world, or seemingly random. I haven't some of these things like Ashes of War, particularly, I haven't found as a result of a boss fight. I've just found them either in a chest or a little mini boss, or even some of those little like beetle things that you kill that often replenish your flasks will sometimes drop an Ash of War. And I've just been kind of experimenting with that and equipping each one. And I've really got I think into the systems stuff and exploring what each thing means. Because I found somebody that was selling them, and they sell a no skill one, and I was like, why would you want something that's no skill? But I found that if you put that on a shield, normally I know it won't apply to you because you're not using a shield, but if you're using a shield, your L2 attack defaults to parry because it's the shield. Whereas if you put no skill Ash of War on a shield, it takes that away, and that means it defaults to your right-handed weapons Ash of War. So then you can still use that whilst you're using a shield.
Oh, okay.
So there's stuff like that it's just like experimenting with things, finding something, wondering why, knowing that there's a reason why everything exists. I think that's one of the things I like most, is trusting that there's a reason for everything, and then like exploring that, which is why I've spent almost 20 hours playing it, and I've beaten Margit or Margit or however you pronounce that. But that's it. I've then just gone off exploring.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that that has really appealed to me the most about this particular game. And it's why, like, I'm thinking about it even when I'm not playing it. And that doesn't happen very often. So I really want to go and play Elden Ring right now. So, just that huge amount of that, like, invitation to explore and to experiment has been, I think, a huge, and I hope that means a lot more people will play it who have been put off by the Souls games, because there's just more choices. If you're stuck on something, just go somewhere else and do something else, and don't worry about it. Don't bang your head against that brick wall too many times. Go somewhere else and just see what else there is out there.
Yeah, like a common thing that I've heard from people is that it's a more difficult game on an isolated basis. So the bosses are some of the hardest bosses that there's ever been from a From Software game. but it's less punishing because you don't have to. You're not locked into just keep bashing your head against that boss until you do it. You can just go and do whatever else and level up and earn some new items, and then that leads to a different play style.
Yeah, and that's the yeah. It's not even like go away and grind and come back. I mean, that does happen because there's no scaling, but that doesn't happen. That's not why you're doing it, or it doesn't need to be why you're doing it. You can find a completely legitimate alternative path somewhere that leads off somewhere else and into a whole another bunch of quest lines.
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't necessarily feel like grinding. Yeah, and it doesn't feel like grinding because you're off doing things rather than just kill this mob, regenerate, respawn them at a grate and then kill them again and then kill them again. I did that in Demon Souls. There was one point. There's a bit. Where is it? I can't remember. It's around where the Tower Knight is in at the start of Demon Souls. So there's a bit you can farm there after you're like quite deep into the game, and then you come back to that area and then you can farm some knights there. And I remember doing that like 10 or 15 times in a row and just like leveling up 4 or 5 times. It's like, okay, now I'm going back in and defeat that boss. Like you can do that here as well, but you don't have to. I do think though that
I think you sort of forget to. I mean, I don't know. Does that make sense? Like you kind of, even if you have the intention of doing that, because there's so much in the world and the world is so densely populated, you might think, oh, that's what I'm going to do, and then that just leads you somewhere else, and then I'll just keep going for a bit and see what else there is, and you end up in a completely different area.
Yeah. It can be quite overwhelming that because like it feels like, oh no, like I'm missing things. I'm not fully explored this area and I'm moving away. Do you use those markers? No, on the map you can mark stuff.
I have. So initially I was only using the beacons, which is just I think you press X and it puts a blue column of light in the game world for you to follow, which is really cool. It's really useful for things like finding pieces of the map, which you pointed out to me, that like you have to look for those little obelisk things that you can still see on the map even when you haven't uncovered the map. So like marking those as a point to work towards. But yes, then I've used the markers, which are like the little green seals. You can pick, 8 different pictures. I've used those a couple of times on things like where I need the sword stone keys. I've used those because they're not marked on the map, so I've used that as like I've used the one of a sword it's like when I get another like swordstone key, I need to come back here to try this area again. I've probably only put 2 or 3 down so far, and I think you can put up to 100. So I haven't gone anywhere near in depth wise, but and I found that useful as well.
Yeah, I use a sword one for bosses that I haven't beaten, and then I'll replace it with a skull once I've beaten them. Just so that anyone looking at my map will really see all the death that I've caused. What do you think about the difficulty? Because on the bosses, because Majit, however you say it, he's been the toughest boss, I think. Of the ones I've beaten, he was the most difficult ones. He was the most difficult one to beat. There's other bosses that I've not beaten that are harder. But of the ones I've beaten, he was the most challenging. Godric is like the next proper boss, main boss after him, it seems. Right. And I found him much easier. Like it took me probably 1/3 of the number of attempts to beat him as it did Margit. And as I think I mentioned before, like I beat Godric by whittling him down with the arrows at the end. But with Margit, it's much harder to do that.
You can't do that.
Yeah, because and he just rushes you. Like if you get a bow out, and it takes a little while to it's not like shooting a gun. Like he has to reload the arrow, he aims, he shoots. It takes a little while. He just rushes at you. Like so, you just can't really rely on that.
Yeah. So I can understand. I can see why Margit might be the first barrier to progress for a lot of people, and I had to fight him several times. I did have the spirit summons thing, which I think definitely would have helped me, or it did help me, and probably helped me more than it would help you, given the way that you've described that you've built out your character, because that served as a point of aggro for then Margit to go after, and then I could kind of go behind him and try and get a few hits in and that kind of stuff. So he was hard. I would say, somewhat ludicrously, I've actually had more. So to answer the question in terms of the difficulty, I found it to be pretty much boss-wise on par with some of the previous Souls games. There hasn't been. I don't think there's any that I've found incredibly frustrating. I think the fact that I can go into a boss fight in most situations, knowing that I can walk away from it, helps a lot in terms of with the frustration. I think also the way that you can respawn either at a site of grace, which is the equivalent of the bonfires, or a statue of Marika, which is just like a little mini checkpoint, helps a lot with that, because you can go up against it again and again and again with minimal backtracking if you want to, or you can just say, forget this, I'm going somewhere else. So that experimentation and that system has led me to experiment more and go off into areas that I'm probably not prepared for, because it doesn't feel as punishing when I inevitably die. Sometimes rather, ignobly to just a bunch of rats or something stupid.
Yeah, just beaten Godric and step around the corner and a rat.
A rat has killed me. Awesome. So I've not had any particular problems with that. What I've found the difficulty has done, the nature of the difficulty, is highlight to me where my strengths and weaknesses lie. Because I had more trouble killing this random knight in a room in Stormvale Castle. Not a boss, just a standard enemy. I went in there and it's like a trap situation. I won't spoil it too much, but just to say that you go into a room, there's this sort of trap situation and you get surprised the first time. And that was more of a situation of banging my head against the brick wall than it was fighting the bosses that I have. And I got quite bloody minded about it and was like, oh, I'm going to beat this guy. And I don't think I even needed to, really. I just had to go in there to get a key. Yeah. But that has been, and that's where there's been the most amount of backtracking that I found, that it's not where you start. It's this side bit of Stormvale Castle, and you have to go through a few enemies, not loads, but a few to get back to him. So it has that very familiar Souls experience to me of rushing to get back to that point that you were just at, because you're like, oh, I really want to do this, and then making mistakes on the way. So then you end up in a worse position than you were the first time you tried to do it, etc. So the difficulty, the difficulty I found has been mostly of my own making, where I've been very determined to do a particular thing, like, almost bloody minded about it, over actually getting stuck and not being able to progress anywhere. Because the world is so, even very early on, the world is so wide, the breadth of the world is huge. And so I have just gone off exploring places. I haven't got to a point where I've reached like multiple dead ends, and it's like, well, the only thing for me to do now is go back and try that boss that I've tried 50 times. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if there's like it lulls you into a full sense of security in that way, because you think, oh, I'm doing great, and then you go up against the boss and then you die repeatedly. I don't know, but that's been my experience anyway. It's been like there's just always something else to do, so I haven't found myself being frustrated yet.
Yeah, I think I'm at like, I don't know, there must be 5 or 6 like areas that I'm on the edge of, but I haven't explored yet. So there's always 5 or 6 different places I can go. I don't know how you play, but I like yesterday or the day before recording this, like I spent some time just racing around the map on my horse and just unlocking map pieces. So now my map is filled in to quite a large extent, but I don't have on a lot of the areas that I've unlocked. I don't have many or any sites of grace on there. Yeah. So I've and I didn't really know what my intention was really, but I was just, I don't know, I just wanted to like open up more stuff so that I've just got everything there available. Yeah. As and when, and I don't know. I mean, I've come across some enemies that I definitely like. There were these giant lobsters, and I wasn't expecting them to be so tough. And that was a bit of a mistake. I should have just ran by them. But yeah,
I mean, I've done a similar thing. I have unlocked a certain amount of the map. I have found that broadly, by following the main path, by which I mean like the in-game path, like if there is a worn road just from what would be traffic in the world as worn this path into the dirt, by following that to get to one of the map places, I have found kind of that I find at least 1 or 2 sites of grace in doing that, and so then that just gives me sort of a hub, I suppose, to then explore the area from. And again, if and when I die, I'm just going back there, so it's not a big deal. So yeah, I mean, I don't think I've got anywhere near Godric. I've only just started exploring Stormvale Castle, having got past this the toughest enemy in the game so far for me, which was this random knight in a room. And yeah, but I've definitely gone wider than I have deep.
Mm.
And again, particularly in comparison to, and I think that speaks to the world design, that I've always thought of the Souls games as being relatively open, not open world. I've never really considered them, they're kind of built around hub areas. And there's also, it has that thing of, yes, you can go almost anywhere at the beginning of Dark Souls, but there's some places where it's very evident you're not meant to be going early in the game because you'll get killed in one hit by a random, just little enemy. Whereas this genuinely feels like, I likened it when it first happened to how it felt, and this sounds a bit cliche, but how it felt at the beginning of Skyrim all those years ago, the first time I actually played Skyrim, not, having played it through a couple of times. But that opening bit where you come out of the tunnels and you're in the world and you're like, oh, I can basically go anywhere. I've got, yes, I know I'm meant to be going to this place, but I can go anywhere. And that's what it felt like coming out into the world in Elden Ring, was I can go anywhere, and in doing so, I'm finding all this stuff. It feels like a world that exists and has existed and there's reasons for things to be where they are that don't involve, well, we should give the player something to do every X paces or every X minutes. The player should have something to do. This feels like there's stuff to do because it's a world that exists. When I compare that to some open world games I've played recently, is just is a class above, many classes above, really.
Yeah, well, I think that's really where the story of the game is, isn't it? And I think that Elden Ring is a great example of what's possible in terms of creating a sense of narrative within the player when games rid themselves of trying to include or trying to base their narrative structure around other mediums like movies normally.
Yeah.
Because like the real story here, like, yeah, there's a story, and yeah, there are NPCs and characters, and they've got desires and whatever, fears and tensions and whatever else they've got. But the real story here is the one that revolves around your actions, your choices, your successes, your failures, and how all of those combine to create something that's unique to you, even though it's a shared context. The actual actions and the things that you do will be unique to you. Like, no two players will ever do exactly the same thing in this game. Probably within 20 minutes, there's no two players that have done the same. Well, maybe not 20 minutes because that's the opening area, but 20 minutes after going into the main world, there's probably no two players that have done the same thing. So it's interesting. It's one of those games that's really interesting to talk about for that reason, right? Because you're talking about a common framework, but the actions and the activities and the choices that you've made are different to everyone else. So then I think one of the great strengths of the game is that the game, like you said, that you're thinking about it when you're not playing it, and we're talking about it now. Like, one of the game's great strengths is in the life it has outside of it being played, in that it's almost as fun to talk about it with people as it is to play it and see what their story is, and in how their mind has interpreted it and how their mind have made certain choices that are different to yours. And that's one of the great things that games have when they really embrace that kind of narrative structure that isn't just trying to copy other mediums. And this is, a great example of that.
Yeah,
right.
And it does mean that there is actual conversation, give and take, in the sense of like trading information. I say, I'm 10 hours into the game, you're 10 hours into the game, let's have a chat. And our experiences, as you say, are going to be very different. And we're going to have little bits of information to trade with each other about the game. And it's not just, yes, I've beaten X, Y, and Z bosses, and I'm this far along this path. It's like, well, I went here and found this random thing, and if you've got that weapon, you might really want this particular Ash of War, which you can find here. And there's just like a load of little bits and pieces that you can trade with people that, again, it does give it that kind of life outside of the game itself. And that's there hasn't been, I think, a game for quite a long time for me that has been that feels like it fits itself to me, because there's so much stuff to do. Like, however I want to play, there's stuff to do for that play style. No matter how clever I think I'm being, I get partway through the game and I've got couple of swordstone keys, and I think it occurs to me to go back and do that bit right at the beginning of the game where you need 2 of them to unlock this mist wall, and like, what's down there? And you're rewarded for thinking about stuff, for the choices that you make, rather than just following a path, rather than understanding that I'm going from A to B and I just follow that and then I'll be rewarded because that's the right way to play this game. That's the right path to go down. You're rewarded basically for whatever you do in some way, shape or form. And that's, well, that feels very liberating. It's like, well, I can play the game how I want to play it rather than knowing that I'm meant to be doing this or meant to be doing that.
Yeah. And I like that the game doesn't sort of, yeah, exactly. Well, the game fits itself to you, but it also doesn't pander to you. Because like I've done, what was it that I did? I can't remember what I did, but I beat an enemy and then I opened a chest, and then the chest, and it was like a tough enemy to beat and a tough chest to find. And then when I opened it, it was I can't remember what it was, but it was something relating to magic. So I'd just done all this stuff to find this magic thing. I said, I'm never going to use that. But like, but rather than it being annoying, it just makes it's like I'm just one part of this world. The world isn't submitting itself to me, and I picked a samurai, therefore everything I get is going to be about the sword or the bow or whatever. Like there's
no sense of I deserve something. There's no the game doesn't care about like, well, I've just and that might have been a boss that you banged your head against a brick wall and then you beat it. Right, I can't wait to see what my reward is for that amount of effort. And then, as you say, it's something that you can't use or aren't going to use, and it's and it gives you it kind of, I think it elicits a sense of place better than just I am the player, I expect this from this, and that's what I get given. That doesn't happen here. I'm still going around looking for something like that fits. I want to dual wield flails is my particular flavor of the month at the moment. And I've been to places like that where I've fought things and I've got like a massive great axe, and it's like, well, I'm just never going to use that, but I'll keep looking. It's like, it was fun. The getting here was fun. It's made me a better player. It's done a bunch of other stuff. So there's a real like sense of this is how the world has been designed in such a way that it's not trying to congratulate you or reward you for doing anything in particular. It just exists for you to explore and find your own reward basically, rather than be given it.
Yeah. Have you spent much time in the Roundtable holds? Because I haven't spent as much time there as I did in like the Graveyard in Bloodborne or the Nexus in Demon's Souls, but they're introduced in a very different way in those games. They're like front and center, like pretty much at the start. Whereas in this, you've got to go. Well,
I'm not even sure if the way that you unlock the Roundtable hold is just through time or through getting to a particular story beat or what it is, or if it's just like you've died 50 times, have access to the Roundtable hold. So to speak to that idea of how it's introduced, it isn't framed as the big hub area, even though that is effectively what it is. I've been back there a couple of times. I think, has anything changed in the time? There's clearly a couple of spaces or a couple of corners or like a little desk or something where NPCs will appear once I find them in the world. I don't think anything's changed yet. And there's a bunch of doors that I can't open or that don't open or,
Well, I won't say too much, but I gave someone an item. I gained an item from the world, went to the Roundtable holds, spoke to someone, gave them the item, and then that unlocks something else in the world rather than the Roundtable, rather than unlocking inside the Roundtable. Is it the Death Route?
The Death Route, yeah.
And then that takes. Have you been to that place?
It's like the far-flung corner of the map, up in the right-hand the northeast corner of the map.
Yeah.
When you've done, I was nowhere near it at that point, and then that unlocks that, and I went out into the world to have a look at the world up there, and got quite quickly
by that giant that's destroyed. At the gate.
I actually got on one. Most of the times I've been up there 3 or 4 times. 3 of the times I just went past him with no problem, and then one of the times he decided to stir and killed me very quickly.
Yeah.
But on the other times I've been out into the world, and there's these little imp things that
the tiny
are
ones,
pretty deadly. Yeah. They're like got a disproportionate number of hit points for what they look like, and they hit really hard. So I explored around there. I mean, and then died a lot, and then decided to go somewhere else. And so yes, that was a thing that you got through the Death Route, which has made me now want to go and find more of these death roots.
I think that's an interesting sort of element to the game in how it shares its information, because you don't know. I have no idea how big the world is. Absolutely no idea at all, because I don't know what I don't know what I don't know. You know, like I didn't know that whole map piece was there, because when you bring up the map and you zoom all the way out, it's quite ambiguous as to like what more there is to have, and it's also you start unlocking stuff that's underground as well. So that's not immediately obvious. So there's no sense of how big the world is. So you don't really still. I've played it. I don't know. I'm level 37. I don't know how many hours I've played it, but the still even by the time you've played the game, most open world games this much, you know how big the world is, or you know straight away how big the world is. You might not have access to it immediately, like in Grand Theft Auto or whatever. Like, you know how big the world is. You might not be able to access it all immediately, but you know how big it is. But in this, just don't know how big the world is. Don't know how much is there to see. Which creates a certain I don't know, what does it create? It creates a sense of I don't know, feeling lost in a way, but like not lost as in don't know where to go, but just lost as in like the rules of the world are not shown to you. Like up front.
And that feel, there's definitely a feeling it creates in me, which is that the world is there for my character to explore, not for me as a player to get a very clear sense of. Like, it's the world, even the way the map communicates that information, it's not communicating it to me, the player, it's communicating it to my character. Because on something like, more recently Horizon Forbidden West, you do get a sense quite
it's just
early on of how big that world can be. Like it's, and look, it's all surrounded by mountains or whatever it might be surrounded by, and here's a island off in this bit, which I'm sure I'll be able to get to at some point, or perhaps that will be, DLC in some games, you'll see that as. But here it's like, well, this is as my character explores the world, that's how I get to learn about the world. And that just feels good as well. It's like that sense of actual exploration of how far does this go, rather than, I think that it speaks to that thing that often I think it's probably quite a common thing, that when you're told in a video game that you have a lot of freedom in any given sense, one of the first things you want to do is test that limit. You want to test that freedom. If you're told that you can climb any mountain, then you want to find the mountains that you climb, and yes, you can climb them, but there's nothing there. Like, it's basically featureless map, because it was an empty promise. It was like, there's nothing here in the world for you as a player or a character. It's just, yes, you can mechanically climb any mountain. And here you can't do that. You can't test those boundaries as easily. You just keep exploring, and you'll find pretty quickly where the bottlenecks are. And some of that will be based on your own ability, and some of that will be based on you need a certain item that you'll get from somewhere. I've got like half a medallion, for example, at the moment.
I've got that. The left half.
Probably. I don't know, maybe.
I found that.
And I know I just trust that I'll get the other half at some point. And so there's just, it's so kind of rich. It feels like a game that exists, or a world that exists for my character rather than for me as a player. And that is, just feels refreshing. It's quite a nice position to be in, to just go exploring. And, there's no wasted time in this game. It's just, I'll go and explore for an hour, which quickly turns into 3 or 4 hours. So,
well, along those lines, I think we are out of time for this, unfortunately. But who knows? We'll play some more, die some more,
do some check-ins. I'm sure.
Do some podcast check-ins as to how it's going. But do get in touch with us. We are at Indie by Design on Twitter. If you're playing Elden Ring, you want to discuss Elden Ring, you want to tell us which video game character you base your Elden Ring character on. We are at Indie by Design on Twitter and on all social media networks. And as many of you are sure to know, we write and produce and publish books on video games, which you can purchase for yourself at indiebydesign.net. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and we will see you again on the next episode.